Howdy once again, everybody. So this is part 2 of Barlow's Knoll. Again, just to walk you back a little bit in case you missed part of the first part, we are basically dealing with, this is the domain of the 6th Corps under Carl Schurz. A point about that I missed earlier. So don't forget, Reynolds, John Filton Reynolds, was killed very early in the mornings fighting. So everybody had to move up. Everybody got stepped up, and basically there were a lot of generals in day 1 who assumed newer and higher commands than they had been used to, and that's a point that should be taken into consideration. There's some good discussion on this from the ABT, of course, from maybe the 161st anniversary video that they did here in Barlow's Knoll, and I'll try to remember to link that. But right now we're looking at the Almshouse Cemetery. The old almshouse does not exist anymore, but I'm probably wrong here, but let's just say it was a little further south of the cemetery, somewhere in this direction, maybe right behind these trees a little bit. You know, again, that's not exact, that's approximate. I am not a battlefield guide. But that's important because I'll get back to that in just a second. So to pick up where I left off, everybody was in a bad position. Everybody started to go down, everybody started to get pushed back, as the Confederates under Rhodes was coming over from this direction, of course, because his men were still doing good at Oak Ridge. Some of them started to advance from that direction. And then in comes Jubal Early, more or less from the north or the northeast of town. So they are obviously going to be flanked. Everybody kind of knows it, and it's just, you know, day 1 is just chock full of desperate battles. And I like to reiterate again, day 1 especially in the story of Gettysburg, it is really no time to be playing armchair quarterback, because I doubt that I or any of you could have done any better, and they were just dealing with some very, very bad situations. And just like the earlier part of the fighting on the first day, further to the west, you know, back at McPherson's Ridge with John Buford, their whole point was just to delay and to delay and to delay as long as they could till more and more and more of the Union Army began to show up. But everybody starts to go down in rapid succession. It's a really bad ordeal. There was a Douglas Fowler who goes down. Francis Channing Barlow goes down. At first he is shot, I believe, in his side. He gets a big hole in his side, or between his side and his hip. And then he is shot a second time in the back. The bullet that hit his back was apparently spent, but he was, of course, in very, very bad shape. So let me see, it was I might get this mixed up. I think it was Barlow who was taken to the almshouse, where, no, okay, I'm sorry, either Wilkeson or Barlow was taken to the almshouse and was looked at by 4 doctors, 3 Confederate doctors and 1 Union doctor. All said that he was not going to make it through the ordeal, and he's one of those really miraculous stories where, after grievous wounding, kind of like John B. Gordon, which, you know, I mentioned in a prior video that's not too far back in the reel, he was one of those lucky ones that actually made it through some really bad wounds. But the point of kind of the main point of me making this part 2 here is to end up on Lieutenant Bayard Wilkeson, who was manning artillery. So again, we have Douglas Fowler that goes down, Barlow goes down, and that brings us to Wilkeson. He was the youngest, I don't know if I'm going to get this exactly right or worded exactly right, but he was the youngest lieutenant or the youngest Union man in charge of any artillery battery. I think perhaps in the Civil War up to this point, but definitely in the Battle of Gettysburg. He was 19 years old at the time when the Battle of Gettysburg took place, and I'm going to give you a screenshot. If I can get my shadow out of the way. but I can tell you the story generally speaking because I know it fairly well. So Wilkeson came from a prestigious family, by the way. His grandfather was one of the people who established the city of Buffalo, New York. And now here's an interesting part. His whole family is viewed as abolitionists and very pro-union and very against slavery. One thing I would like to point out is his grandfather was one of the people who, and it doesn't tell you on the sign, but his grandfather was one of the people who actually advocated for sending the slaves back to Liberia, which in my mind isn't really actually that non-racist, shall we say. And like I'd also like to point out, Lincoln at one time actually advocated for the same thing. This is all politics. I just want to reiterate one very unpopular point, guys, that the whole issue of slavery was a wedge issue. It was a political issue, and many people in the North were just as racist as people in the South. They were just done with slaves first because they industrialized first. And I just have to sneak this in here, guys. All the cotton, of course, was coming from the South, but it was everybody up in the North who was making all the profits. All the cotton mills were up in the North. All the cotton merchants were in Massachusetts, and it was all being sold by trading people out of the city of New York. So I just want to reiterate that one more time, because if you're just tuning in, that's something that I strike on time and time again, and I'll just never give up on. Back to Bayard Wilkeson. He is commanding about 4 guns at this position. You can see him right there. Yep, 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, there were 2 others of his battery that were posted kind of back to the south. But everybody again was in a really horrible position. They were going to be flanked, and they knew they were going to be flanked. Again, I just want to reiterate that Barlow formed a salient, and it perhaps was a wise move because he may have been anticipating Jubal Early coming down the road in this position. Anyways, Wilkeson, the youngest commander of a battery at this point in the Civil War, or at Gettysburg, eventually took to his white horse and was just doing one of those things sometimes that generals do, in such moments, and was trying to rally his men, to inspire them and to get them to stay put and fight it out. He is eventually hit by a shell, because again, don't forget, there was, as I mentioned in the last video, they were caught in the crossfire here too. I mean, they were being flanked by two large portions of the Confederate Army from Rhodes in that direction, and then just after that from Early in this direction. But they were also being flanked or caught in the crossfire by cannon, because Rhodes has some units over there, some batteries over there, who are sending shells over in this direction. And somewhere in this general direction, there is a pretty large, certainly a much larger Confederate battery that begins shelling them as well. And not too long after Wilkeson takes his horse and tries to inspire his men, he goes down and is hit by a piece of artillery. His leg is grievously wounded. I mean, it is amputation is beyond question. His life is now very much at stake. In an extreme moment of courage, the guy actually amputates the last bits of sinew that are holding his leg up with some kind of knife, a penknife or some kind of knife that he had on him. Now again, like I said, I can't remember exactly who between Barlow and between Wilkeson, who was taken to the Blocker farm and who was taken to the alms house over there. But Wilkeson was in extremely bad shape, and the crazy thing is, he pretty much knew he was gonna make it. And his father, who actually worked for the New York Times at that point, had to learn about his son's death here at the Civil War, because his father was also here, although he was with General Meade at his headquarters. And he finds out about his son's death almost immediately, and I think he finds his son actually what's left of him on July 4th. But he has a famous quote I'm just not going to get to it, guys. It's a really interesting story. I'm sorry. Another point I want to make really quick is Barlow was not looked upon favorably by his men because he was quite xenophobic. And again, the German army on this side of the field was largely, it was about 50%. So when he got shot, he was nearly left for dead by many of his troops. I'm just going to wrap it up, guys. Please learn more about this battle, this part of the battle on day 1, and I will see you guys later.